amongst the beautiful environ in northwestern Ontario, where it's snowing today, on the water in the summer, or on exploring trails in the winter. When indoors, Nicole likes to read biographies and to cook. So Nicole, thank you for presenting for the next 30 minutes on connecting the North and lessons learned for other communities in Canada's North. I'll provide a 1-minute reminder, and then we can move into a discussion with the participants' questions that come up in the chat section. We're looking forward to hearing your experiences. Over to you now.
Well, thank you everyone for inviting me to speak. While I recognize that this is largely focused on health, I do want to just take the opportunity to say that there are some fundamental enablers that allow us to have really good global health. And my talk will largely be around how the need for broadband infrastructure is critical for the North. So again, my name is Nicole Brown. I'm the owner and operator with my partner at FSET Information Technology. And my talk is about thinking big and flipping the script. So Pikangikum, the SpaceX Starlink Angel account in our deployment there. So who are we? So we started in 1999 in northwestern Ontario. And largely our business started with Indigenous communities where we began seeing that they were getting taken advantage of when it came to things like hardware, software, and just basic infrastructure. There was a huge need to be a managed service provider, and that's really where our business was born. It started as a mom and pop shop. We were really, really small, and both of us had full-time jobs while we were running this business. In 2017, we saw that there was a dramatic need to pivot our business. And by pivoting our business, we knew that things were quickly moving to the cloud. And if we didn't make that change, then our business was likely not going to survive. So we spent a lot of money and did a lot of research and development to take our business to the cloud and as such become a cloud provider for our communities. We do consider ourselves a progressive technology company. And the reason for that is because we continue to look into the future and say, what is coming? What do we need to be prepared to do? And how will that enable our clients and customers to be successful in whatever business they run? We believe that our solutions are by the North for the North. We recognize the unique challenges of the North, our vast geography, our limited availability of broadband, our limited ability to do logistics, so in terms of being able to put things on planes or ship them, freight them, however we need to move equipment. What I like to say is planes, people, and equipment. We're doing all of that. And we're currently operating in Quebec, northern and southern Ontario, and in Manitoba. So our relationship with Pikangikum First Nation began in the summer of 2018. And you can see on the map here where Pikangikum is relative to southern Ontario. It sits at approximately 51.8 degrees latitude, which is important for our later discussion around the SpaceX Starlink partnership. What we recognized in Pikangikum was that there was a dramatic need for robust technology infrastructure changes, but we couldn't do it all at once. And the first thing that needed to happen was transferring their existing infrastructure into server-based computing. And without getting too complicated, server-based computing allows us to run technology on very limited broadband through a data center. And that's exactly what we did. It allowed Pikangikum First Nation to radically change their workflows and allow them to do things as simple as download an attachment in their email. They were no longer having to do it locally, meaning what happens is when an email comes through and you need to open an attachment, it takes a lot of bandwidth in order to do that. By putting them into the cloud and into the data center, they're essentially asking the data center through mouse movements and keystrokes to paint the picture on their screen. So it allows them to use very limited bandwidth in order to do that. The second thing that the community asked us to do was they had a request for better internet access. And it's important to note that this was not their first kick at this. They had for many, many years tried to do this on their own and just didn't get anywhere. but this was the first time that we had been asked to help get them better internet. We felt that we were in a position to do that because of our 20 plus years in this industry. We knew the market. We also know the players, the big telcos. And we thought perhaps there was an opportunity here that we would be able to use influence in different ways that the community hadn't been able to. So I know this is a busy slide, but that's just to give you a timeline of what had happened in the community. So in February of 2019 to June 2019, there was the typical conversations with a traditional telco about terrestrial-based fiber upgrades. So terrestrial-based fiber is when they dig into the ground, they lay the fiber line, and it goes into a community building. For that amount of time, there was little to no movement. No proper costing came back. There was no timeline. And it just felt like we were in the same loop, running the hamster wheel, and we were getting absolutely nowhere. In the summer of 2019, you may or may not be aware, there were massive forest fires in the Pikangikum area that required 2 evacuations in 2019. Because of the forest fires in late summer, early fall of 2019, the existing fiber that was in the community became non-existent. It was not functional, and that was due to the downgrade or degrade of the fires. So, and the second large component to why the fiber and the existing infrastructure wasn't working was just the sheer volume of homes that were being connected to the internet. So for perspective, Pikangikum is a community that has approximately 3,000 people and has approximately 400 homes, and to date it has 15 businesses or institutions, so things like a health center, a community center, the water treatment plant, etc. So in September 2019, after going through all of this process and not getting anywhere, after 8 months of trying to figure out how we were going to get internet, the message back from the large telco was that they were going to provide the community with 10% less than what already had in place. So we were scratching our heads, as you can imagine, thinking, how is this going to work? This doesn't even make any sense. So the internet in the community was less than 1 megabit, so think of dial-up or anything audio-visual was just next to impossible. It couldn't be done. So for context, if you live in a larger city, you need approximately 10 or 70 to 110 for your ability to have multiple people stream Netflix. So that just gives you a little perspective. And at that point, we were really at a place where we couldn't go back to the community again and say there just wasn't a way. We had to find another way, and so we did. So this is just a little bit of a plain picture with the kits. So as we said, we had fought for the big telcos for over a decade. We knew that it was time to think of this problem differently than the traditional ways, and that it was time to do something very radical. So in order to do anything with internet, we wanted to be able to achieve or exceed the Canadian standard set by the CRTC of 5010. So my husband and business partner said, I'm going to get a hold of Elon. And our entire leadership team sat there and sort of looked at him and thought, okay, that sounds a little crazy. And then at the same time, we thought, no, he's going to do this. He's really going to do this. So he did not get a hold of Elon directly, but he got a handshake away. So Dave really worked networks, worked every single angle he could. He used LinkedIn. He used any available means to try to get a hold of SpaceX. And we were successful in doing that. Why this is so important is because once we were able to get a hold of SpaceX, we were able to tell the Pikangikum story, and the community gave us the permission to do so. What ended up happening from there is that we were able to put a proposal together for SpaceX that we believed that Pikangikum should be and was the perfect candidate for their Better Than Nothing beta, which allowed SpaceX to have a customer in Canada test their equipment in the furthest latitude that they could. At the time, SpaceX could only go up to approximately 52 degrees latitude, and as I had said earlier, Pikangikum is at approximately 51.8, 51.9. So through much of last year, we were working behind the scenes with SpaceX and Pikangikum in order to get this set up and ready. Our delay was due to the ISET approval. It sat on the federal minister's desk for months, and I can confidently say that. We were pushing and pushing and pushing to get this approved. And as you can imagine, this was in 2020 when COVID was running rampant. And what's important to note is that at this time in the community, many things had shut down. You couldn't get in. All dental services had ceased. There was very little in terms of, there was no court happening at all, so fly-in remote courts were not happening. And the processes that had happened for health were becoming more and more complicated because of COVID. Once we received the ISET approval on November 6th of 2020, we started receiving the kits on Thursday, November 12th of 2020 through the 20th, and we began deploying the kits on November 26th and 27th with approval to come into the community. And what you're going to understand here very quickly is why this was such a big deal, was because our role in this was that SpaceX Starlink is a direct-to-consumer model, which means that consumers can just go and buy the product. But there had never been a community-wide installation of SpaceX Starlink, and there was no means to make that happen. So our role was really to facilitate and coordinate all the moving pieces to this project. And I say my role with this was moving the people, the planes, and the equipment all during COVID. So what you're seeing here are some pictures of the first installation. So as soon as we were on the ground on November 26th of 25th, within the first 15 minutes, we got the box unloaded. And what you're going to see here is a connection that was made literally within 15 minutes of landing on the ground. And what you're seeing here is the community partnership that we had. So when we went in and did the installation, we made sure that there was a community member who was going to be doing this as well, so that they had the capability, knowledge, and know-how to do this within their own community. So everyone talks about, well, what is the performance and why is this important? So in order to really do anything audio-visual, it's very important to have low latency, which is what is the bottom bullet here. So 24 to 45 milliseconds is what Starlink is actually performing at today. And what you can see is that over time, and I have it underlined in red, is that the performance of the actual service has improved dramatically. So Pikangikum not only was the first community to be connected to SpaceX Starlink, but what it allowed them to do was use their feedback, and the engineers at SpaceX were tweaking and improving service in real time based on the users in Pikangikum. So what is the future for healthcare in the North when there is broadband? So it's really important to highlight that when we do our work, we don't just focus on healthcare or just focus on education. For us, it's incredibly important to look at the larger impact to the communities that we're working with. So one large area that has been affected by COVID, especially for the remote North, is education. So these students are at home with their families, just as they are in Southern Ontario, but they don't have any access to broadband in order to do remote learning, which, as you can imagine, will have lasting impacts for years to come. The other big piece, which I touched on earlier, is justice. So in the North, justice court is held in the communities. Since COVID, court across Ontario in the North has ceased to exist for over a year. And you can imagine the impact that has on individuals, the backlog to the court system, and just overall impact to individuals who are in the system. The next big piece of work that is being looked at is economic development for Indigenous communities. Once you have access to broadband, the world quite literally opens up and you become global. And there's a lot of work going on right now in this area around once individuals and communities are connected, economic development opens up as well. The other area that is being looked at and in partnership is law enforcement. So areas in the far remote north also have challenges, just as the community would, with real-time information. And as you can imagine, this is of critical importance when we're talking about any kind of criminal event that law enforcement needs to be able to do their job. They need real-time information. And then lastly, but certainly not least important, would be healthcare. So what we're beginning to see in areas like in Pikangikum, for example, is that things like mental health assessments, where although you can have mental health workers come into the community, COVID has presented this this challenge where that's just not possible. And as you probably have heard from other speakers or read in the newspapers or online, that COVID has accelerated the rate in which technology adoption is occurring, and it's particularly true in healthcare. So what you're starting to see now is this incredible uptake of mobile applications, third-party applications for things like virtual care, virtual health, mental health assessments, and et cetera. And that is a direct result of COVID. However, it does not allow northern communities to participate if they do not have broadband access that is adequate. It's important to recognize that in the north, while a lot of folks will say, but don't they have access? The access is inadequate to do the things that we as a society need to do now, especially in COVID and in a post-COVID era. We are currently working with over 100 Indigenous communities and rural municipalities to realize broadband capabilities with low Earth orbiting satellites, so LEO technology, which is what SpaceX is and Starlink is specifically. And I think that over the course of the next 18 months, what you're going to be able to see is that this technology is going to change the world. It won't just be Northwestern Ontario. It won't be just in BC or in the Maritimes. It is now starting to come into Australia. We've just been contacted by someone doing something similar in Australia. It is going to, they've already been deployed in the UK and across the US, but you're going to start to see how LEO technology is going to truly globalize rural communities in the north. And it's a very exciting time, and it's exciting to be a part of it. I recognize that I have about 10 minutes left in my talk, so I've actually have everything that I wanted to say, so I can open it up to questions early, if that's okay.
That's just fine, Nicole. Thank you so much for your presentation. One question that came up, you were mentioning about COVID. How did the access via Starlink help in the vaccine rollout? Could you talk a little bit about that? We've heard about, in the south, we've heard about Orange and what was happening in the far north, but not as much about areas in the north of the province of Ontario. Can you talk about that a little bit?
For sure. So what we have been told is that from the chief and the pandemic table in Pikangikum, that SpaceX Starlink was critical to their ability to roll out the vaccines in a timely manner. And what that meant to them was that they could communicate in real time, and that they could communicate with the province, or sorry, with the feds in real time via video and via email. They were able to sign documents, they were able to send them back and forth, they were able to actually implement what was intended within a very timely and time-sensitive manner, which just would not have been the case this time last year.
Well, we certainly have used some of that in Southern Ontario based on the news reports we're hearing from here. I also wanted to acknowledge that you tried very hard to have a member of the community co-present with you today, and I wanted to thank you for that. Could you talk a little bit about the hesitancy for someone from the Pikangikum band to join you today?
Yeah, so and it's funny because I know one of my colleagues is on the line right now, but one of the things is this is fairly new technology, and they're very humble people. They don't like to talk about themselves too much, and they also are shy. So it's you know, they don't want to get on and talk about themselves. They don't necessarily want to you know, get on camera, and that has been true a couple of times, but they are certainly open, and they've given us their blessing to tell their story for them.
Thanks so much for that. Another question that's just come in, I've just lost it here and it's coming back. Are there any concerns with this technology for use in the territories? Latitude, for example, is there a northern limit to what you're up to?
So that's a great question. So right now, SpaceX Starlink technology has the ability, depending on the cell, to get to approximately 53 degrees latitude. So in northwestern Ontario, that would be the NAN, some of the NAN territory. What is happening right now is that the Canadian government and SpaceX is working on the Canadian ground stations. There needs to be approvals for that. And once there's Canadian ground stations, then the capabilities will go higher into approximately 55 degrees latitude. And then anything north of 55 will be covered through the polar constellation. So we're looking at probably somewhere into 2022 to be able to cover the Northern Territory.
One of the themes that's come up over and over again in this series, Nicole, is the term infrastructure. And we can talk about infrastructure in terms of technology, in terms of transportation, in terms of food security, and so on. I'm wondering if you could comment on how those components of, or further comment, because you've mentioned a little bit about how those components that we refer to as infrastructure can affect health services in the north. Could you talk about that a little bit, please?
Well, I think it's pretty simple. Without the basic infrastructure, the health services that we envision in a more urban center just simply don't exist in the same way. So it's not to say that, for example, Pikangikum doesn't have healthcare, because they do. They do have a physician, they have a nursing station, they have all of the things that they need for immediate care. But when it comes to the tertiary care, things of, for example, mental health therapists, or perhaps counseling, or the things that we take for granted that we can just simply get, doesn't exist there. And the logistics to get something there. This is a fly-in only community with access by road during the winter on the ice road. So you have to think about, if there is a 15-year-old child who is in need of mental health, how do they get that? How do they access that kind of health care? Well, it's pretty difficult. They can go to the health center, but if they're not in immediate harm, then what? They're not going to be flown out for therapy. They do have mental health therapists that come into the community. However, that has been significantly limited due to COVID. So there has to be another means in order to allow for access. And to do that means critical infrastructure. And in our perspective, that is broadband access.
Thank you for that. Another question that came up from a comment from Lars Helander from Norway, who's a Sami, and he was talking about the skepticism that Indigenous groups have around initiatives that are coming from the south, if we can term it that way. You live in the north in Kenora, not as far north as the Canadian north, but you live there. Had you encountered any skepticism about this particular project? It sounds like the people were very enthusiastic about it. Did you encounter any skepticism? And if you did, how did you deal with it?
No, I mean, in this case, I can't say that that will be true across every community. I can say that that was not the case in Pikangikum. you know, when you have been asking for something for north of 4 years, any shred of hope was something to hang on to, and they were incredibly enthusiastic and said, we want to try. Something is better than what we've got. So, and from that perspective, I would say, you know, perhaps it was because we do live in the north and we understand the challenges. It could also be that we were in constant dialogue with the community. This was never a FSET initiative with SpaceX. This was a Pikangikum initiative where we were an enabler in getting them the service that they need. It wasn't us pushing an agenda. It was really the community saying, we need to figure this out. Help us figure this out.
And just a follow-up to that, how is it that the community members in Pikangikum understood how important this was for them, as opposed to other communities where there needs to be more enabling done? Can you talk a little bit about that? And I know that question sounds really weird, but hopefully you'll understand it, that it was really coming from them as opposed to an initiative that you were presenting as an opportunity for them.
That's right. So I think why it's a great question, first of all. Two key people were instrumental in this. One was the chief, or is the chief, and two is a person by the name of Billy Strang, who is the CEO of the Health Authority. They knew that if they did not get broadband internet access, or at least better than what they currently had, right? Because they did have access. I can't say that they didn't have it, it was just very poor. That things in the community were not going to continue to progress. And they wanted the ability to have things progress in the community, not in terms of just technology, but in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, in terms of giving hope to their young people. And connection is what does that, you know, because they are an isolated community. It's a fly-in only community, and it's in the middle of the bush. So when we go into Pikangikum, you are isolated, and that would be true of any fly-in community. And they recognize the need for global connection. They're very progressive in that way. And really, it was driven by the chief and Billy.
So progressive leadership within a community.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Another question's come up. Again, it's trying to connect what you're up to a more global initiative. So it's inviting you to think big here. With the more opening up globally, what are the key forces of economic development? So we're getting right back into your educational preparation here, Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
For example, attracting foreign investment, tourism. Any specific programs available to link with business community in other areas of Canada and the world? Do you see a potential here in terms of what the community is up to?
I do. I actually think that what you're going to start to see is communities doing their own version of tourism, because they can. I think that is on the horizon. I also believe that we're going to start to see really amazing artistry coming out of the north. It already exists, but if you're able to globalize it in terms of putting it online, it's very different than the grassroots methods that are currently happening now. I also believe that education is going to change. Who's not to say that the next Elon Musk doesn't come from a far northern community, right? We don't know, because they don't currently have the, for an Indigenous individual in Pikangikum who would like to learn how to code, they need to leave the community to be able to do that and to learn. But what's not to say now that they can't attend university or college from their community? That's a possibility now, and that wasn't a possibility in October of 2020.
Okay, that's a dramatic shift then.
Yes, absolutely.
Another question is around Starlink, so getting more practical here. Are there other service providers than Starlink? Is there competition in the satellite broadband sector, or is Starlink the only one?
So great question. Right now, in terms of LEO technology, so low Earth orbiting technology, SpaceX Starlink is the only one. Now, Canada does have a version called Telesat, but it is many, many, many years away from even being able to be market ready. And to be quite frank, the other satellites that are on the market, so you may, it's escaped me, the other satellite company, but it's very, very high in the sky. So the latency is very, very long. So for us to be able to do what we're doing in real time, can't happen. Low Earth orbiting, so LEO is what is the enabling technology that allows for low latency and real-time communication.
And
so
LEO,
go ahead.
LEO stands for what?
Low Earth orbiting.
Thanks.
Yeah. So the short answer to your question is no, there is no competition right now.
Okay.
And it'll take a good while for there to be competition.
Okay. Another thing is looking at this phenomenal opportunity that you're bringing to us today, which is just such an amazing story. There's always things that people may say, okay, is there a darker side to this in terms of, are there things that you're thinking, oh, geez, I really hope this does not happen? Have you had any thoughts about that around, are there any dangers, or I think dangers is too strong a word, but are there any darker sides of this particular initiative that you're thinking, let's be really careful how we tread here?
Personally, I think equitable access for broadband internet is the period statement.
Right.
I mean, if you were to say that there is a downside to broadband in Southern Ontario, what is it? I think that here, you know, the implication that having broadband in a northern community could have downside is just, well, what's the downside in Southern Ontario? This is about equity,
right.
And they don't have broadband internet, period.
Right. So in terms of equitable access then, what you're looking at is what types of things can be done to enable equitable access across all communities in Ontario, wherever they are.
Doesn't matter where they are. You know, the CRTC has said that there's a standard for internet of 50-10. If you go to the far north, that is not even close. Okay? So how do we start to level that playing field? Well, that is about access.
Okay. And what things can people be doing in the South to enhance the accessibility for people in the North?
I think it's really largely around education and understanding that we have to do things differently in the North. Relying on the typical in-the-box thinking will not get us where we need to be by 2023. We have to flip the script. We have to think differently. And part of why this project has been successful and why there has been so many communities across Canada that have reached out is that they recognize that how we've been doing it for the last decade isn't getting it done.
So if we could take this to a concrete level then, you and your partner at FSET flipped the switch.
Yeah.
What did it take for you to change your thinking around moving this particular initiative forward? What was it that you had to change so that people can also figure that out for themselves?
So that's a great question. I would say that really comes from Dave's tenacity. He is a visionary. And I can confidently say that although sometimes it takes me a while to get on board because I'm very tactical, I'm very operational. Dave's visions are big, but he's very rarely wrong. And when he said, Nicole, we have to do something differently here, I did not know what that meant at the time, but he was like a dog with a bone. He was determined to find another way. And I think when you have a big idea, you refuse to hear no.
Mm.
And he refused to go back to the community and say, I can't help. He was done having that conversation. And so he put his head down and figured out a different way.
Mm. Interesting. You know, McMaster University has some has a tradition of visionaries. We're going to hear from a couple in a couple of minutes, but there's just a couple more questions I want to sneak in here. So you're in the right forum today. Are there any partnerships with universities or colleges in Ontario for technical skill training and postgraduate programs through online platform? Any government funding or policy to support such partnerships?
So it's a great question. We're just now starting to explore things with other universities and colleges, mainly because we're always looking for really skilled individuals, visionaries, out-of-the-box thinkers, and folks who really want to lend their hand to changing the world through technology. That is our ethos. We are not physicians. We are not lawyers. We can't solve the clean drinking problem and those types of problems. But what we can do is change the world through technology and use it for good. So for those like-minded students and graduates who are looking to do the same, we are always open to partnering and seeing what we can do to either hire individuals or partner for projects or things like that.
Okay. Here's another question, and it sounds like these particular groups may not be interested in partnering with you. Those would be Stargazers.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard Stargazers, that's the one to get your tongue around. I've heard Stargazers may be upset their night sky is polluted by the low Earth orbiting satellites. This is just one unintended consequence of Starlink. Are there others that you have heard about or have in mind? Have you heard that particular criticism?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And how would you respond to that?
Again, it's about equitable access. So if there is a way to get broadband high-speed internet to the far north and the territories in a timely manner that doesn't cost hundreds of millions of dollars, bring it on.
Okay.
But in the interim, there isn't.
Okay. So you see this as an interim approach, and you're looking for other approaches as well.
I think technology will continue to evolve. You know, we can't look into the crystal ball and say what the technology will look like in 5 to 7 years. But what I can tell you is that it is an immediate service-ready stopgap that gets people access.
Okay. Okay. One more question. We know that the impact of these projects on relationships in business can sometimes have an impact because of the amount of stress that's involved in being an entrepreneur and getting boots to ground and getting a project on the move. What impact has this particular project had on your relationship with your partner at FSET?
That's such a good question. We work a lot. As you can imagine, we live together. We quite literally have offices side by side. We've actually just recently talked about how we have to set up boundaries, personal boundaries, so that work does not become all-consuming. I think that would likely be true of many people, though, in the COVID era. When you're working from home, it's very easy to just continue to work when your computer and all of your technology is just right there, as well as your smartphone. So we've put up some pretty strict barriers. When we leave the upstairs office area, we don't talk about work anymore. And that has been very good for our family life.
Okay, so important to have boundaries on what starts where and ends where. Okay, Nicole, thank you so much for speaking with us today about this exciting initiative and what your plans are for the future. I want to also thank everybody for the compelling questions. The presentation was excellent, and the questions were just so helpful in getting a really larger understanding of what you're up to. I do want to introduce another visionary that's at McMaster. The series has been inaugurated by Dr. Andrea Baumann, the Associate Vice President of Global Health, the Director of the WHO Collaborating Center in Primary Care Nursing and Health Human Resources. Andrea, will you please help us wrap up this webinar series and introduce your president, Dr. David Farrar. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion, and thanks everyone for joining us today for our the conclusion of our second annual webinar series from McMaster University. We organized the series to really try to grapple with some of the complex issues, transdisciplinary issues of global health, and in this case, particularly with the complexities of the development of our Arctic regions in Canada. I want to thank especially Nicole Brown, who highlighted the issue of communication and again looked at how difficult it is and how challenging it is to continually pursue the principle of equity for all our citizens in Canada. So thank you, Nicole, for that. The previous speakers, again, illustrated very well the economic, the educational, the health issues in the North. And at McMaster University, we're very committed to work together with our partners in the North in the future. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce our special guest today, Dr. David Farrar, who is the president of McMaster University and has been very supportive of our webinar series. So, David, thank you very much for joining us and helping us, assisting us to wrap up this very successful webinar series. Over to you, David.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can. Thank you.
You can hear me. So I've had great difficulty connecting this morning, Andrea, and apparently it's telling me now my camera is not set up for this session. So let me just say a couple of words. First of all, I'm sorry I actually was late joining Nicole's presentation. It sounded like it was fantastic. I really enjoyed the sessions that I've been a part of, and had wished my technology had performed better this morning. So thanks to everyone for joining this second Global Health webinar series from McMaster University. Over the last 10 webinars since the 1st of February, we've had hundreds of participants joining us from dozens of countries. Andrea, I've only been able to attend a few of these, but I've been so impressed by what you and your students have organized. This is a unique speaker series that really reflects the transdisciplinary nature of global health. And each speaker has focused on a specific area of interest, which really brought the whole area of Arctic global health to the forefront. I want to thank all of the speakers for sharing their diverse and expert perspectives. All of the webinars have been recorded and are on the Global Health website for future reference. In terms of next steps, I'm pleased to be able to announce that Global Health will be offering a new course on the Arctic in the next academic year, so stay tuned for more details on that. This webinar series and the new course certainly reflect the spirit of McMaster University in reaching out to communities around the world. McMaster has more than 70 international exchange agreements. Our students come from 92 countries around the world. Over 170,000 of our graduates are located in 137 countries, and our full-time faculty hail from 69 countries. McMaster is focused on our global community, and I hope that you've discovered, as people concerned about health, that we have much more in common than we do in our differences. So thanks again for making this webinar series such an outstanding learning experience. Enjoy the rest of the week, and I wish I had been able to attend more of these webinars. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Farrar and Andrea, for your closing words. Everyone, be sure to visit our Global Health website to access recordings of all 10 webinars on the Arctic. So enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you. Merci. Gitu. Bamapu.